Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Welcome to our 10th lecture of MTH108 Business Math 1. Today we will start our 5th chapter, which is about linear functions and its applications. In our last chapter we have studied about the functions and the different types of functions. Mainly linear function, quadratic function, cubic function, polynomial, rational function, combination of functions and composition of functions. In this lecture we will study in detail about the linear functions and its applications. So what are the main objectives of the chapter is to present a discussion of the characteristics of linear functions, present a wide variety of applications of linear functions. Today we will discuss mainly about the linear functions and its applications. But before starting our today's lecture, let's revise what do we mean by the functions, because this concept is very important to understand the rest of the things. I hope the concept of function and the definition was much clear to you from the last two lectures, but just to revise it, what do we mean by a function? We have seen in our last lectures that there are 5 ways to describe a function in words, using a mapping diagram, by an equation, formula, or using a graphical representation. Okay, if we want to define a function using a mapping diagram, let's say we have our two sets A and B, and the set A is of apples and the set B is of trees, and there is some rule F associating the elements of the set of apples to the set of trees. Let's say we have 3 elements here and we have 2 elements in the set of trees mapped like this. The second element to the second and the third to the second as well. Then we can see from the mapping diagram that each element of the input of the set of input has a unique element in the set of outputs, which is the set of trees. That is, every apple must belong to some tree, and here we have seen that every apple belongs to at least one tree. One and only one tree. However, one tree can have 2 apples. So this type of mapping defines a function. Okay, the same set, but now with some different rule. The same set of apples and trees. Let's say this is defined to this one to this, and to this as well. Okay, now in this case, first apple belongs to one tree, second apple belongs to 2 trees at the same time, which is not possible and contradicts the definition and violates the definition of the function. So this type of rule defined is basically not a function. Okay, we consider one more example. Here we have the same set of apples and the set of trees and the rule F, and we have 3 elements here and 2 trees here. What are we doing? That one apple is mapped to one tree, second apple is mapped to second tree, and that's it. Now, is this rule a function or not? Then we can easily see that the one apple is not assigned to any tree from the second set, which means that one element is left behind from the set of inputs. So this type of rule defined is also not a function. Okay, so we have briefly recalled what do we mean by a function with the help of a mapping diagram and a daily life example, that to each element of input there must be assigned, the rule must assign a unique element of output. In our last lecture we have also discussed different types of functions, and what do we mean by linear function we have also studied in our last lecture, but let's revise it again, that a linear function f involving one independent variable x and a dependent variable y has the general form y is equals to f of x. We have studied this form in our last lecture as well, which was like a1x plus a naught, where a1 and a naught are constants, and with the condition we all should know that a1 should be different from 0. We can easily recognize that the general form of a linear function in one independent variable is actually the slope-intercept form, with the slope a1 and y-intercept 0 a naught. Okay. Now what does this equation tells us basically? That a change in the value of y is directly proportional to a change in the value of x. That is, whenever the value of x increases, the value of y also increases, and whenever the value of x decreases, the value of y also decreases. And the rate of change is constant and is given by the slope a1. If we recall the definition of slope, it was basically defining us about the steepness and the inclination of the line, and in other words the rate of change of y with respect to the rate of change of x, that is the ratio of change in y to the ratio of change in x. This was our slope according to our definition. So the rate of change is constant because a1 is a constant here and is given by the slope a1. As an example, we may consider our weekly salary function, which we have also discussed in our previous chapter. We have seen that the weekly salary function y is equals to f of x was given as 3x plus 25, where y is the weekly salary and x is the number of units sold per week. Now this is a weekly salary function in one independent variable x, that is the weekly salary is only depending on the number of units sold per week, which is the variable x. So this weekly salary function is linear in one variable x. Okay, we have our equation y is equals to 3x plus 25. What does this equation tells us basically? That 25 represents the base salary, that is when no units are sold in a week, then the weekly salary will be 25, and 3 is the commission of each unit sold. Our equation was, just to recall, y is equals to fx is equals to 3x plus 25. So this 25 is basically showing the base salary, and 3 is showing the, which is also the slope, is showing the commission of each unit sold. Now the change in weekly salary is directly proportional to the change in the number of units sold. Definitely more units sold in a week will give rise to more salary. And slope of 3 indicating that increase in weekly salary associated with each additional unit sold. The graph in this case will be a straight line because it is an equation, because it is a linear equation in one variable. So the graph will be a straight line starting from 25, because when x is 0, y is equals to 25, and the graph lies in the first quadrant where both x and y are positive. Definitely x cannot take negative values, which means that negative number of units sold, which is not possible, and y cannot take negative value, which means that the weekly salary is negative. So the values of x and y are restricted to the first quadrant only. So this is the graph of the weekly salary function y is equals to 3x plus 25 starting from 25, that is when x is 0, y is equals to 25. Okay, now we see the definition of linear function involving two variables, that is a linear function f involving two independent variables x1 and x2 may also be written as x subscript 1 and x subscript 2, and one dependent variable y has the general form y is equals to f of x is equals to a2 x2 plus a1 x1 plus a0, where a2 and a1 are non-zero constants, that is the value of a1 and a2 cannot be equal to 0, and a0 is just a constant. So what does this equation tells us? That the variable y depends on the values of x1 and x2 at the same time, where x1 we have written as this and x2 as this, and the value of y varies in direct proportion to changes in the values of x1 and x2. Now increase in x1 by 1 unit implies that change in y by a1 units, that is the coefficient of x1, and increase in x2 by 1 unit implies the change in y by a2 units, which is actually the coefficient of x2. So this definition is very much similar to the definition of linear function in one independent variable. What we have done here, we have only added one more independent variable x2 with the non-zero coefficient a2. Okay, now as an example we come back to our weekly salary function again. Assume that a salesperson's salary depends on the number of units sold of each of the two products, that is the salary function is given as y is equals to function of x1 x2, which is equals to 5x1 plus 3x2 plus 25, where y is again the weekly salary, x1 is the number of units sold of product 1, and x2 is the number of units sold of product 2. Again, this salary function gives us the base salary of 25, that is when no units of product 1 and no units of product 2 are sold, then the base salary of the week will be 25, and a commission of $5 will be given on each unit sold of product 1, which is x1. That is the coefficient of x1 will be the commission. Similarly, the coefficient of x2, the coefficient of the product 2, which is 3, will be the commission on each unit sold of product 2, which is x2. Now we have seen the definition of linear function in one variable and two variable. With the help of these two definitions, we can generalize the definition of linear function in n number of independent variables. How? It is very simple and very much similar to the previous two definitions. that is a linear function f involving n independent variables. There should be one v here, involving n independent variables where n can take any value, any positive integer value. N can be one independent variable, n can be two independent variables. For these two cases we have already seen the definition of the linear function. N can be any three independent variables, and so on. So a linear function f involving n independent variables x1, x2 and so on up to xn, and one dependent variable y has the general form. So the general form, we will write it in the same pattern as we have written it for the previous two cases, that is function of n independent variables, which will be f of x1, x2 and so on up to xn, which will be now the linear combination of the variables with the coefficients, which is a0 plus a1 x1 plus a2 x2 plus so on up to an xn, where the constants a1, a2 and so on up to an, where these are the non-zero constants, that is these constants cannot take the value equal to 0, and a0 is also a constant, but just a constant, can take the value equal to 0 as well. Okay, now we look at some examples of the linear functions in one variable and then in two variables. First, we need to understand few terms from the business point of view, that organizations are mostly concerned with cost, which are often defined in terms of two components, that is total variable cost and total fixed cost. First, we will see an example of linear cost function. A firm which produces a single product is interested in determining the functions that expresses annual total cost y as a function of the number of units produced x. Accountants indicate that the fixed expenditure each year are 50,000. They also have estimated that raw material cost for each unit produced are 5.5 and labor cost per unit are 1.5. In the assembly department, 0.75 in the finishing room and 1.25 in the packaging and shipping department. So, and we are asked to write the total cost function of this firm. So the total cost function will be in the form y is equals to c of x, where x is the number of units produced and capital C is representing the cost function, where x is the number of units sold. So cost is further divided in total variable cost and total fixed cost. We have seen it in our previous slide that the costs are defined in terms of two components, that is total variable cost and total fixed cost. And here x is the number of units sold or produced depending on the case. So we have seen from the data that total fixed cost is 50,000. Here it is mentioned that accountants indicate that the fixed expenditure each year are 50,000. So this 50,000 will cover under the heading of total fixed cost. Now we have to find the values of total variable cost, that is the cost which is depending upon different parameters. For this we have first the raw material cost, which is 5.5 per unit produced, and the labor cost. Okay, now total variable cost is further divided into branches, that is total raw material cost plus total labor cost. If X is the number of units produced, then we have 5.5 is the total raw material cost, and 1.5.75 and 1.25 are all included in the total labor cost. Labor cost depending on 1.5 in the assembly department, 0.75 in the finishing room, and 1.25 the packaging and shipping department. So 5.5 is basically the raw material cost, $1.5 is in the assembly department cost, 0.75 is in the finishing room, and 1.25 is in the packaging and shipping department cost. Okay, so this is our raw material. All these are covered under total labor cost. Then what do we obtain? Basically that y is equals to 5.5x, which is our raw material cost, plus the sum of all labor cost, which is 3.5x, and 50,000, which is our total fixed cost. Okay, so simplifying, we obtain that y is equals to 9x plus 50,000, where 9 represents the combined variable cost per unit of $9, let's say. That is, for each additional unit produced, total cost will increase by $9. Okay, now we consider another example of revenue function. What do we mean by the revenue? That the money which flows into an organization from either selling products or providing is often referred to as revenue. The most fundamental way of computing total revenue from selling a product or providing a service is total revenue is equals to price into the quantity sold. Now we assume that selling price is the same for all units sold. Then suppose a firm sells n products. If xi equals the number of units sold of products j, and pj equals the price of product pj, then the function of revenue from the sale of n products will be, if capital R denotes the revenue function, then this will be, revenue function is basically defined as price into the quantity sold, that is price P1 into the quantity sold X1, and here we have n products, so plus price P2 of the quantity sold X2 plus so on up to price Pn into the quantity sold Xn. Now we can sum up all these or write all these terms in a simple way by using our summation notation, which will be sum of Pi xi or Pj xj, because we have used j in our explanation, and j is varying from 1 to n. That is, this is our total revenue function of n products, where P is representing the price and X is the quantity sold of each product. One more example of linear profit functions. Now, profit for an organization is the difference between the total revenue and the total cost. That is, profit is basically equals to total revenue and the difference between the two minus total cost. If R of X denotes the total revenue, and C of X denotes the total cost, where X equals the quantity produced and sold, then profit may be denoted by capital P, function of X, is defined as P of X will be the difference between total revenue, that is R of X, minus total cost. So this is how we define the profit function. Definitely profit function is a linear function in the variable X, which is the quantity produced and sold. Now, from this linear equation of total profit, what can we conclude? That when total revenue exceeds total cost, okay, for the sake of simplicity we write our equation here again. Here R is the revenue and C is the cost. When total revenue exceeds total cost, that is when R is greater than C, profit is positive. The resultant P will be positive. It is, we all know this very well. Usually called as net gain or net profit. Okay. The other case, when total cost exceeds total revenue, that is when C is greater than R, the resultant P will be negative. That is, the profit is negative, usually called as net loss or deficit. When the revenue and cost are linear functions of the same variables, then the profit function is also a linear function of the same variables. Okay, up to now we have seen 3 applications of linear functions from the business point of view: linear profit function, linear cost function, and linear revenue function. Now we come to an example. A firm sells a single product for $65 per unit. Variable cost per unit are $20 for materials and $27.5 for labor. Annual fixed costs are $100,000. And we are asked to construct the profit function stated in terms of X, where X is the number of units produced and sold. And further, we are asked to calculate the profit and if annual sales are 20,000 units. Okay. Now, X is the number of units produced and sold. Okay. To find the profit function, what we have to find basically, recall our profit function P of x is equals to R of x minus the cost function. So first we have to find our revenue function and cost function separately. We'll put these in our formula of the profit function, and then we will find our profit function in terms of x, which is the number of units produced and sold. Okay, first we come to our revenue function. The statement says that a firm sells a single product for $65 per unit. So if the product sells for $65 per unit, then our revenue function will be equals to price into quantity sold. R of x, which is 65, and the quantity sold is the x number of units. So this is our revenue function. Similarly, we can calculate our cost function. So let's read further. Variable cost per unit are $20 for materials and $27.5 for labor. If we recall that our cost function is basically depending on variable cost plus fixed cost. So first information is given about the variable cost. That variable cost per unit are $20 for materials. Okay, let's write it here. $20 for materials and $27.5 for labor, plus 27.5x. Annual fixed cost are $100,000. Fixed cost 100,000 plus dollars. So from this we have calculated our cost function. Simplifying, we obtain, simplifying the values of x, we obtain 47.5x plus the fixed cost will remain as it is. So this is our cost function C of x. We have already calculated our revenue function R of x, and now with the help of these two we can calculate our profit function. It is very easy now. Simply put the values in our profit function as P of x will be equals to R of x was, okay, let's write it again, minus C of x, which is $65 per unit, minus our cost function was 47.5x plus the fixed cost 100,000 units. Simplifying, we obtain 65x minus, here we have a minus sign before the cost function, so we have to take care of the in between values. It is better to put the bracket before the minus sign and then open it. Okay, now we are opening our bracket, minus 100,000. Simplifying further, we obtain 17.5x minus 100,000. So this is our profit function. Definitely it is a linear function in terms of x, that is the number of units produced and sold, and 100,000 is coming from the total fixed cost. Now P of x is a linear function. The slope is 17.5. What does the slope tells us that for each additional unit produced and sold, total profit increases by $17.5. And in business and economics, this type of profit is called as marginal profit. Okay, so now we have simplified and found the linear function of profit in terms of x, but we were asked to do something more, that is, if the firm sells 20,000 units during the year, then we were asked to find the profit. How we will solve it? Our profit function is 17.5x minus 100,000. Now firm is selling 20,000 units during the year, which means that the value of x, that is the number of units produced and sold, is 20,000. So here x in this special case is 20,000. Putting the value of x, we obtain is equals to 17.5 into 20,000 minus 100,000. And what do we obtain? This, and finally we obtain 100,000, which is positive, means that in that year the firm has a net profit. We have to solve some practice questions from section 5.1 with the follow-up exercises from question 1 to 5 and question 8 to 9. Okay. Question 9 says that a gas station sells unleaded regular gasoline and unleaded premium. The price per gallon charged by the station is 1.299 for unleaded regular and 1.379 for unleaded premium. Okay, now gas station sells two products. Let's say X1 is the first product, which is the regular gasoline, unleaded gasoline, and X2 is unleaded premium. Okay, the price per gallon charged by the station is 1.299 for unleaded regular. This is 1.299 for X1, which is per gallon, and 1.379 for unleaded premium. Okay, now the total cost per gallon from the supplier is 1.219 for unleaded regular and 1.289 for premium. If X1 equals the number of gallons sold of regular, we have already said X1 is the number of gallons sold for regular and X2 is the number of gallons sold of premium. We are asked to formulate the revenue function. The revenue function from selling X1 and X2 gallons respectively of the two grades of gasoline. So revenue function now will be a linear function but of two independent variables. So first independent variable is x1, and the price, revenue function is price into quantity sold. Quantity sold is x1 and the price is 1.299. The second quantity sold is x2, that is the unleaded premium, and the price is 1.379. So we have already written our revenue function in terms of the two independent variables x1 and x2, which is unleaded regular and unleaded premium. Now second, we are asked to find the total cost function, that is C of x, from purchasing x1 and x2 gallons respectively of the two grades. Okay, C of x, that is the cost function, will also be a linear function of two independent variables x1 and x2. That is, in this case, C of x will be equals to the cost of x1, which is 1.219, plus the cost of x2, which is 1.289. So this is our cost function. Now thirdly, we are asked to find the total profit function, which is P of x is equals to our revenue function minus the cost function. By putting the respective values, we obtain 1.299 x1 plus 1.379 x2 minus 1.219 x1 minus 1.289 x2. We obtain 0.08 x1 and our revenue function plus x2 0.09 x2. So this is our profit function, 0.99 x2, and some value of x2 after simplifying. Now further, we are asked to find the total profit expected to equal if the station sells 100,000 gallons of unleaded regular and 40,000 of unleaded premium. That is, x1 is given as 100,000 and x2 is given as 40,000. And what will be the profit in this case? We will simply put the values of x1 and x2 in our profit function and will calculate to see if the profit is positive. The result is positive, then the profit is positive and we obtain the net profit. If altogether we obtain some negative value, then we obtain net loss or deficit. Okay, let's have a look at one more question. Question 8 says that a company produces a product which it sells for $55 per unit. X is again the number of units produced and sold. Then A company produces a product which it sells for $55 per unit. So price is equals to $55. Okay. Each unit cost the firm $23 in variable expenses. Okay, now we are talking about some cost in variable expenses. It is $23 per unit. Okay. And fixed cost on an annual basis are 400,000. Fixed cost on an annual basis of 400,000. So cost function is the sum of total fixed cost and total variable cost. Okay. If X equals the number of units produced and sold during the year, then we are asked to formulate the linear total cost function. First thing is the total cost function. We know that total cost function is the sum of total fixed cost and total variable expenses. What do we get here? Simply 23x plus 400,000. So this is our linear cost function. Further, we are asked to find the total revenue function, that is R of X. R of X is revenue function is defined as price into the quantity sold. So price is 55 and quantity sold is X. So this is our revenue function. Then the third thing which is obvious is to find the total profit function. We can find the profit function by using our revenue function and cost function, and by putting the respective values we obtain 55x minus 23x minus 400,000, and by simplifying we obtain 32x minus 400,000. So this is our profit function, a linear function in terms of the independent variable x, which is the total number of units produced and sold, and 400,000 is coming from the total fixed cost. Okay, there is one more part D, which is asking us that what does annual profit equal if 10,000 units are produced and sold during the year. That is, if the value of X is 10,000, we are asked to find the profit function. Okay, then P of 10,000 will be equals to 32 into 10,000 minus 400,000 will be equals to 32 equals to 320. 100,000 minus 400,000, and the answer is negative, which is minus 80,000. So when only 10,000 units are produced and sold, the organization will have net loss or deficit, because the profit function tells us something negative value and there will be no net profit. One thing more is asked, that what level of output is required in order to earn zero profit. By zero profit we mean that when our profit function is equals to 0. We will discuss in detail these things in our next lecture. Zero profit we mean that when our profit function is 0, that is, there is no profit at all, then we are asked to find the zero profit. In this case, what we will do, we will simply put our profit function, that is this function, equals to 0, okay, which means that 32x minus 400,000 equals to 0. Simplifying, we can easily solve these linear equations by adding 400,000 on both sides. We obtain this, and now by dividing the whole equation by 32, we obtain by 32 which is by simplifying 100,000 by 8. So this is our, so this will be the value of x when the company will have zero profit. Of course, we can further simplify it. So in our today's lecture, we summarize the facts what we have studied. We have seen the definition of linear function in one variable. This definition was clear to us as we have already studied in our previous lecture. But what was new here, that is the definition of linear function in two variables, that is when two independent variables are involved. Then the weekly salary function was the example which was helpful in both the cases. Generalizing the concept, we defined the linear function in n variables, and we have seen some further applications. The applications were to linear cost function, linear revenue function, linear profit function. We have also seen some examples where we were asked to find the profit function when we have two independent variables, and the concept of zero profit. With this we end our today's lecture. In our next lecture, we will see some more examples of linear functions, and we will see the break-even models. With this we end our lecture, and Allah Hafiz students.